Hello and welcome to the Two Guys, One Roto YouTube show. This is ostensibly episode 1, but actually episode 2. This will be our first actual content episode. I'm here with my compatriot, Rich Sayer.
Hello, what's up?
And we are going to record today our top 10 prospects in baseball. The way we're going to do this, since there's going to be a fair amount of overlap, I imagine, is for those of you who are board game enthusiasts, we're going to do it Boggle style. So as I name a prospect or as Rich names a prospect, that if the prospect overlaps on the other guy's list, then we'll kind of cross them off and we'll talk about them, for a little bit. And then once those are all crossed off, the ones that did not have crossovers, we'll talk about a little bit more individually with some banter, I'm sure, whatever. But anyway, bottom line is this is going to be each of our top 10 prospect lists. This is not a collaborative list, but rather two individual lists being discussed collectively, if that makes any sense. At any rate, so without further ado, Rich Sayer, why don't you lead us off?
So I'm just going to drop in a name, and when we go from there, right?
You can go from top to bottom. You can go from middle out, whatever you want to do.
I'm going to go. So for me, I think this year, so we're talking about 2024, we're coming into the start of the season. I think there's kind of a couple clear tiers at the top here. So I don't know there'll be a lot of variation, although I did get a clue earlier, so we'll talk about that a little bit. But I'm going to lead it off with hot name in the fantasy community at the moment, Junior Caminero.
Junior Caminero, great. Yeah, absolutely.
I got him at number 3.
All right. Well, he slots in at number 9, actually, for me.
Interesting.
Yeah, but Junior Caminero is still an excellent prospect. Ninth best prospect in all of baseball, or third best, or anywhere in between, or whatever. Wherever you want to rank him, you got to believe that the bat is going to play.
I was down on him earlier. Ironically enough, at this point, it seemed like he maybe didn't have enough power, and then that certainly exploded. So, getting my respect as an earlier doubter. Back to my Cleveland Guardian roots. We can talk about that another time. But what do you got? What's your guy coming up, Dave?
Rich Sayer's perpetual deference of his Cleveland Guardian no longer having boots on the ground. It's fun. But Junior Caminero, I'm going to borrow a little bit from not yet friend of the show, Eric Longenhagen of Fangraphs. In his prospect write-up, he said that this guy pretty much could be Marcell Ozuna's bat year in, year out, but that he's more likely to move to the outfield than he is to stay in the dirt. So that's why he moved down a little bit in my rankings. So
anyway. I don't see that early on, but I'll also mention here as a little bit of an intro, I think we talked about this earlier, I'm more the fantasy baseball guy. So that could be a relevant reason why we have a little bit of a differentiation here. But
Yep, absolutely. All right, so I'll go with an easy one, just to kind of take the element of surprise off, or not the inverted element of surprise. Jackson Holliday, consensus number 1 overall prospect. I have him ranked 3rd. But Jackson Holliday, why don't you talk about him a little bit, Rich?
He is my number 1. So thanks for the segue there. For me, very complete hitter, premium position. Whether it's depends on where it shakes out on the Orioles. They have a lot of moving pieces there, but I see him as a shortstop long term, at least early in his career. Fantastic plate discipline. Enough power, you're not talking about maybe a guy that's going to put up 30 plus, or certainly not 40 plus, but certainly enough power to be dangerous. Loaded lineup, fantastic core of that team there. So all the variables for me are there for him to be successful with a pretty high floor for a long period of time.
Totally 100% agree with everything you just said. Those of you who choose to follow this show as it continues to grow and expand and hopefully reach a larger audience will hear me say many times, you always bet on pedigree. And he's obviously a 1-1 pick. He was first overall pick in the draft. Like you mentioned, Rich, he's part of us in just an embarrassment of riches for the Baltimore Orioles, especially in the infield, although really they have it everywhere. He just turned 20 years old. He's got a career 938 OPS. And in spite of all of that, though, for me, the reason why he slots in at 3 for me as opposed to at 1, there are some doubts about his ability to stay at shortstop because of his team. Now, that shouldn't necessarily matter in a ranking, but he, by all accounts, is a worse defensive shortstop than Gunnar Henderson is. So maybe he moves to the 4. And then also...
Close enough that you do start to look at those variables.
Yep. And then also he, for whatever reason, he just strikes me as somebody who's always going to be very, very good, but never great. Kind of like a Corey Seager light. And Corey Seager is obviously a phenomenal player. And if Corey Seager could ever play 150 games, he'd probably put up something like an 8-win season and win an MVP. But he's never done that. And so Jackson Holliday, to me, strikes me as someone without Corey Seager's prodigious power, probably a little bit better in the batting average, and hopefully better ability to stay on the field for his sake. Anyway, moving along. I guess I'm up next. Is that right?
You threw out Jackson Holliday.
I threw out Jackson Holliday. I'm sorry. That's right. Go ahead, buddy.
So I'm going to close out my top 3, and I'm just going to mention real quick. This is a fantastic year, I think, for people looking at first-year player draft. There's a ton of talent at the top end. It's a deep class as well. I think part of that is COVID from now 4 years ago. So there's a lot of talent in this draft, and there's a lot of top-end talent. As we had some people headed off to college that might have come out of high school 4 years ago. So for me, there's a crazy hype train going on right now, but I got Wyatt Langford at number 2.
Wyatt Langford is also my number 2 prospect. So we have an overlap. But Wyatt Langford, I mean, my notes on Wyatt Langford are pretty simple. It literally says superlative, superlative, superlative. There just aren't any words to describe what this guy did, not only in the SEC last year, but in the pros. Obviously, we all know what he actually, maybe fantasy players specifically might know better what he did in the pros. He had an 1157 OPS in the pros after being drafted with a 36 to 34 walk to strikeout ratio. So he walked more than he struck out. But that was coming off of a 1282, not a typo. Well, not a wordo. 1282 OPS in the SEC, pretty much almost unquestionably the best baseball conference in the country. So facing premium talent in both the pros and as an amateur, absolutely annihilated the ball. The reason for me that he slots in at 2 instead of 1, we'll get to my 1 eventually, but the reason he slots in at 2 instead of 1 is he's probably stretched as a center fielder. So I think he settles into left field ultimately and just absolutely clobbers the ball from day one until the day he decides to hang up cleats, pretty much. Really, his defense, or maybe lack thereof, and again, this is where, like Rich mentioned, he's a little bit more focused on the fantasy. I'm perhaps a little bit more real baseball grounded. His defense is maybe the only thing holding him back from being maybe the best player in baseball one day.
Overall, yeah, possibly.
Yep. So, yeah. So, all right, who's next?
Back to you.
Back to me. Okay, so we'll go with my 1-1, which is a non-consensus. Not trying to be contrarian. I'm gonna back up my argument as best I can. But Ethan Salas is my number 1 overall prospect in baseball.
There you go.
Yep, Ethan Salas is, as everybody knows, prodigious talent. Reached AA. Granted, he reached AA under a specific set of circumstances. He's 17 years old. He was 17 years old. He reached AA, but that was because the Padres moved him up to the AA, the San Antonio team, to help them in their playoff push. So he didn't really earn the promotion, quote unquote, to AA. But still, bottom line was he was 17 years old playing in AA. I got some interesting fun facts on Salas that I want to share. So I don't know if using the term on pace to is fair. Let's just say he could become the 3rd catcher in the last 50 years to reach the majors and see 100 plate appearances by age 20. Okay. Now, the other two are Pudge Rodriguez, who everybody who's listening to this probably not. You're probably not listening to a YouTube show about fantasy baseball if you don't know who Pudge Rodriguez is. And then a lesser-known player named Butch Weiniger, who was a catcher for the Twins and the Yankees, and I think the then California Angels, if I'm not mistaken. He was a two-time All-Star. He finished with 26.5 career wins. But interestingly, in researching this, and this has nothing to do with Salas, but I just have to share these fun facts that I came across. Weiniger never played above A ball. He's the only catcher ever to go straight from A ball to the major leagues. And Dave Righetti of the Yankees famously threw a no-hitter once upon a time on July 4th, and Dave Weiniger was the catcher for that. Butch Weiniger was the catcher for Dave Righetti's no-hitter. So anyway, none of that has anything to do with Salas. Bottom line is that I guess the reason or my rationale for ranking Salas as highly as I do is we've seen Wyatt Langfords. We've seen Jackson Hollidays. We've seen, Junior Camaneros. We basically haven't seen Ethan Salas. If Ethan Salas does, in fact, reach the majors at age 19 or 20, it just doesn't happen. And if it does happen, you're all but assured to have not just a good career, but a remarkable career.
Yeah, I mean, nothing to argue against any of those points.
Yep. So I would
really interesting to watch. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Yep. Now, what's interesting with Salas, I'll close with this on Salas, and this is a term that Rich has used in the past. He cautions people against the player who's quote unquote young for the level, but not necessarily producing at the level, right? Salas killed it in A-ball last year. Absolutely. I don't have the stat in front of me, but I want to see it. It's had like an 850, 880 OPS or something along those lines. Moved up to high A, struggled. Moved up to double A, really struggled. Both in small sample sizes, but still, he was clearly overmatched. And this is what I like to call the Mazzara. Okay, and what that acronym stands for is maybe awesome, zero actual results accrued. So
I approve. I like where you're going with that.
Yep.
As a Nomar Mazzara owner, I'm very familiar with that tale. More familiar than I'd like to be. So I try to stay away from that same road when I can. But yeah, I mean, you're right. So just on its face, you want to take it's an accomplishment to be able to hold. I mean, what were you doing? Anybody at 17?
Right.
You're playing a professional baseball league with people 5 years older than you. Very impressive. Like you said, you got an OPS over 800 as a 17-year-old in single A. So that alone is very impressive. Great at, not one of these guys where you think he's going to just leave catching because he can't stick with it. So yeah, you're planting your flag, and that's great. But yeah, you can't, for me, you can't knock the guy. I'm just excited to see where it goes from here.
Yep. All right, go ahead, Rich. I'm sure I nominated Salas because he's my guy. So your turn, I'm sure.
Yep. So I'm going to jump in to somebody as some of these other lists compiled by people that have significantly more acumen for this than I do. Started to come out that I think maybe I'm a little high on, and that's going to be Jackson Jobe as my number 6 overall prospect.
Interesting. So Jackson Jobe is our first non-over. I'm assuming you had Salas in your top 10. You didn't mention.
So that's a good question. I do not.
Don't have. Okay.
Top 10.
Interesting.
I need to see a little bit more based on what your Mazzara principle was. I like what I've seen so far. I got to see a little bit more. There's a lot of names out there that I really like. All
right. So anyway, Jackson Jobe. I'm sorry.
Yep. So Jackson Jobe for me, it's a little tricky as somebody that's looking at prospects from a fantasy perspective. When I'm talking about fantasy, I'm talking about a points league. For me, that's more relevant than roto, straight roto, 5x5, whatever. And for me, ultimately, the most valuable player you can have is an ace pitcher, especially if you're on a lower contract level. So the trade-off for that is the burn rate on these guys is much higher, right? So it's definitely tricky. But for me, Job is a guy that's shown multiple plus potential pitches, potentially plus control. He's exhibited at times and had a little bit of the injury issue, but I think he's got number one type upside, and I think he's pretty close at this point to debuting in the league. So that's where he's at with me.
Okay, that's interesting. That's a fair argument. I will say that the fallout rate for prep righties is just about the worst in baseball.
Yes.
And they're high school righties, and that's exactly what it is. He was the third pick of the 2021 draft. I think, and I'm going to check this right now on the fly because I was not prepared. Of all the players you were going to throw out, I got to say Jackson Jobe was not on my radar. No, Josh Beckett was actually the second pick of his draft, and not to say that Jackson Jobe is going to have Beckett's career necessarily or not or whatever, but same kind of thing. I guess that would probably be a best case scenario, and that's one hell of a career. That's 35 and a half wins, 138 actual wins, 2,000 innings, 1,900 strikeouts. So World Series MVP, lots of great things that Josh Beckett did over the years. So certainly interesting. Okay. All right. I suppose we're bouncing back to my list. So I'm going to see if I can't come up with another mutual. Jackson Chourio, I've got to believe, is probably in your top 10.
There you go. That's a good place to go if you're looking for overlap.
Yes. So Jackson Chourio is interesting. First off, I wanted to make the Gringo like completely lazy comp to Victor Robles because power, speed, potential, plus in center, so on and so forth. But interestingly, I did a little bit of homework and I was totally wrong. Robles was multiple levels behind Chourio at the same ages. So Chourio is far more advanced. And he just came in his age 18 season. So in 2022, he put up an 879 OPS. At 19, he had an 803 OPS. These are very good numbers. They're not thrilling numbers, but they're very nice numbers. What worries me a little bit, although again, he's 19, coming off his age 19 season, 250 to 98 career strikeout to walk ratio. So striking out a lot. Not uncontrollable strike zone or anything. We're not talking Joey Gallo levels, but that's a lot of strikeouts. So that's something you're gonna have to cut down on. And kind of to use a reference from Major League the movie, where he should be putting the ball on the ground more and running out leggers, or whatever, or laying out grounders. So I don't know. You can't teach speed, right? He's a plus defender. He's got a super high floor. If he can find even some power, he's going to be one of the best players in baseball.
Yep. And then, so for me also, again, I'm looking at the fantasy element of it. So he signed the major league deal. He's going to be up this year. I think he's ready for it. Not much time, hardly any time at AAA, but it's an interesting case study when you look at, and who knows what combination of factors drove this or not, or small sample size. You see that they moved him up to AA, and he was having a rough time first half of the year. But as soon as they got rid of the pre-tack ball, right back there, really strong numbers. Everything just clicked right back. So that's interesting to me. As you look at the minor leagues as kind of a testing ground for some of these elements. What could drive such a stark kind of split between the two time periods just happens to overlap exactly with that event. So we'll see. But like you mentioned, definitely strikeouts is a concern. I was, in looking at this, surprised to see that his K percentage actually been dropping as he's been going up levels. So I like the tools. That's another thing we can talk about as we go through this. I like tools, and hopefully the guy figures it out. I like upside. So he's got both of those elements.
Great. All right. I nominated Chourio, I think.
I believe you did.
All right. You go ahead, buddy.
So I'm going to go into my number 5 player, and that's going to be Evan Carter.
Evan Carter, great. Evan Carter is my number 4, so we're pretty close on that one.
There you go.
And I've got some great fun facts on Evan Carter. Will you talk first?
I'll just mention real quick, like obviously the performance is there. The skills are there as far as you look at batting eye, speed, defense, very high floor. I don't think he'll exhibit the power that he exhibited in kind of a short time period once he got to the majors. But outside of that, you got everything you're looking for. For me, it's a very high floor. And you got a lot of, you still got upside there. So pretty safe pick for me.
So Carter, okay, let's talk about the not great things. He's never hit lefties, like at any professional level. He hasn't hit lefties. But my favorite podcast, Effectively Wild, used to talk about Mike Trout would come back every year with just not to say Evan Carter's Mike Trout, just let's get that out of the way. But Mike Trout would just come back every year with a new thing that, hey, this year I'm going to work on stealing more bases. This year I'm going to work on playing better defense. And he would just fix himself every year. And Evan Carter seems to have that same, it factor, if that makes sense, where he's just going to say, okay, if I'm going to be the player that I want to be, I'm going to need to figure out how to hit lefties, and he's going to do it. And I don't have any statistical, scouting, any rational basis for that other than I just believe it. That's just in my gut. I'm just going for it. And for what it's worth, I did a little bit of homework on this. In the last 50 years, in the postseason, among outfielders, okay, Evan Carter leads all rookies in times on base in the postseason. He got on base 30 times, 30 times in the postseason last year, and he's still a rookie. Like, he's been in the major league, he's won a World Series, he hit number 3 for the World Series champions, and he's still a rookie. Unbelievable. Okay, enough of Evan Carter. I love that guy. All right. I suppose I'm up now. Yep. Going to go with another one that I'm almost certain we're going to have some overlap on is Paul Skeens.
Oh, yes, sir.
Yep. All right, go ahead.
Just, for me, again, the guys coming into the league, this most recent draft, a lot of interesting names there, a lot of upside. And for me, especially, obviously, you are excluding maybe the international free agents like Yamamoto. Skeens is far and away the top pitcher, I think, coming out. You mentioned prep righties, dangerous category. Skeens is a college guy, extremely close to the major leagues. On the Pirates, maybe not as close as he could be. We'll see what happens with that. But he's just got the size, the frame, the pitchability so far. I think you drop him in right now, and he's got the fastball and the slider that you can do some work with. So, for me, he's a very exciting pitching prospect, and he's out of that, I think, kind of danger zone of that 18, 19, 20-year-old type range.
Totally agree. For me, so Skeens is interesting. Skeens did not come into last year as a consensus, even top 5, top 10 pick. He was on first round radar, but he wasn't what he became. And especially the SEC tournament and then the NCAA tournament is really where he kind of exploded, almost to use a crossover to basketball, almost like a Derrick Rose level ascent to the number 1 overall pick. He strikes me a lot as Steven Strasburg without the resume. Steven Strasburg was known to be a top pick in the draft well before he actually became the top pick in the draft. In his sophomore year, he was already garnering, whatever. But that said, Skeens, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, National League Rookie of the Year, not out of the question. I could easily see this guy getting some starts in Indianapolis is Pittsburgh's AAA affiliate, and their AA affiliate, I think, is Altoona, if I'm not mistaken. And I could see him getting a few starts at each of those places to help those places sell some tickets. And then late, Memorial Day-ish, debuting with Pittsburgh and just never leaving ever again. Well, until free agency hits. So all right. You up, Rich? There, I'm up, Rich. There. I don't remember.
So I'm going to jump into another one I expect we will be divergent on.
Okay.
So I've got directly, I got Skeens as my number 8, actually. I don't know if I mentioned.
Yeah, I had him 7.
Directly after him, I've got Shane Baz. So a little bit of same elements that I like about Job, same kind of injury concerns, but what I like is obviously the draft pedigree. So high first round pick a number of years ago now, coming off Tommy John surgery, should be rested up. Has the plus pitches, and he's displayed the pitch ability, high strikeout numbers at every level, pretty good command, not where it could be yet, or hopefully where it could be. But I think he has the upside to be an easy number 2. Maybe we'll see what happens with the command.
Okay.
And he's in the majors right now. So that's, proximity for me, again, in the fantasy level is probably more relevant than what you're looking at.
No, that's certainly a strong case. I will say Shane Baz, I'm gonna have to kind of correct you on the fly a little bit here, Rich. While he certainly qualifies for minor league eligibility for most fantasy leagues, for the purpose of real baseball, he exceeded his rookie eligibility in 2022 because when he hit the injured list, he goes on the 60-day IL, but because he was injured while he was in the big
time
leagues,
on the roster,
he still accrues service time. So he's not eligible for a typical minor league list, but certainly all the promise in the world, and just a monster of a human being. He's just a big guy with a big arm and big hair and big personality, and I don't know, he's the kind of guy that they use the joke. He's the kind of guy whose dick has been in the room 3 minutes before he got there. Shane Baz is a hell of a pitcher. So, all right. I'm going to go with a guy who may or may not be on our mutual list here, but Colson Montgomery is my number 6 prospect.
Not on my list.
Yeah, Colson Montgomery for me. So this is, Rich, and our viewers are about to find out. My favorite player of all time is Scott Rowland, and Colson Montgomery was born in the town where Scott Rowland went to high school. I don't know if that means anything, but it's worth mentioning. But where he was born and where he played high school and so on and so forth doesn't have anything to do with anything. But putting up a 940 OPS in his age 21 season does. I think this guy really, I just genuinely believe this guy. He's big. He's like 6'3", 6'4", 220, 210, 220. He's going to just come up, and I don't think he stays at shortstop. I could see this guy having perhaps not quite the prolific offensive numbers, but defensively having Manny Machado's career. I really do. Where he kind of starts out at shortstop, moves over to third base, and just piles up, a 280 average with 45 doubles every year for the rest of his life. So,
yeah, Machado's not a bad numbers comp, I think.
Yep.
But I'd like to see a little bit more. Certainly a good season. Not great at the AA level, but moved a lot last year. So that's kind of the only thing that held it back for me.
Yep. Okay, fair enough. Your turn.
All right, so we'll stick with shortstops. I'm going to go with number 7 on my list, which is Jordan Lawler.
Okay.
And I'm going to say this is going to be a guy that's 90 to 95% of what I was talking about at the top of this list with Jackson Holliday.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. Lawler doesn't make my top 10, but that's only because I think that guy. I think he's absolutely surefire major leaguer, surefire shortstop. My favorite kind of go-to comp that's meant to simultaneously complement a player and beat up on a player, which is counterintuitive or whatever. But Lawler reminds me a lot of Dansby Swanson. where he's going to be a great defender and he's going to hit you, 290 with like 18 homers and 25 bags. And, just somebody's going to give him a $177 million contract in, whatever it is, 6 years or whatever,
And nobody's going to be that excited about it.
And nobody's ever going to be that excited about it, especially from your perspective.
Yeah.
From the fantasy perspective, he's perhaps the type of shortstop that you're always happy with, but always would be happy to upgrade from, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think he can get to 20 home runs. I think he can get to 30 steals. So, I mean, I think he's pretty solid. Like, he's not going to be, maybe in a fantastic season, a little bit of an outlier season, he's one of the top 2 or 3 shortstops. But I think he'll be in that kind of 4 to 5, 6 range pretty consistently.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Am I up again?
Yes.
Okay.
We got one left, maybe.
Well, we minus the, I'm not sure about in the Boggle style, right? Because I've got 2 names left.
Okay. You got 2, and then we got 1 and 1 after that.
Got it. Okay. There you go. Fair enough. All right. So I'm going to go with the one I would guess is more likely to overlap, and that's Roman Anthony. Roman Anthony, did you make your top 10? No.
Out of my top 10, I like him a lot. He's in the top 20, but he's not in the top 10.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, Roman Anthony. I don't know how, he checks all the boxes. Like he's the, in Moneyball, they talk about, we're not trying to sell blue jeans here or whatever. And like, he's going to sell blue jeans, right? He just looks the part of the baseball player. He got better at every level as he continued to move up. He was better and better. He has a career 849 OPS as a professional. He doesn't turn 20 until this May. That's insane, right? That's insane. And interestingly enough, I didn't know this until did the homework on it for this show, but went to the same high school as Kobe Mayo, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, where the horrific shooting happened once upon a time. But yeah, that's I didn't know that. I don't know if they played on the same team or not. I didn't go quite far enough. They were 2 years apart, so I would venture to guess that one was on the JV team and the other one was on the varsity team. But anyway, that doesn't matter. But yeah, just Roman Anthony for me just is going to be a rock solid major leaguer for years, and maybe even have some borderline MVP caliber seasons.
Yep.
So So all right, your turn, sir.
So for my last name in my top 10, I think I'm a little bit higher than, again, the consensus that I've seen so far. Dipping back into the first-year player pool, I've got Walker Jenkins in my top 10.
Okay, fair enough. Sometimes known as Larry Walker Jenkins.
Fantastic performance out of the gate. No flaws there. Maybe you want to see a little bit more exit velocity. But again, we're talking about a high school draftee here. So, I mean, I don't know about anybody. I don't know where we get to in the future where people put up Larry Walker numbers again, but he could. I see him having the potential as being consistently one of the top outfield producers. Again, specific to a fantasy perspective. So average, power, RBIs, all those numbers.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Big time.
Yeah, no, Walker Jenkins is an interesting pick. It's not somebody who would have made my top 13, let's say. That's as far as I have my top 10 and my 3 that just missed. But would definitely rank pretty highly. And he just same kind of things I was talking about with Roman Anthony, checks all the boxes. And just absolutely prototypical right fielder. He's just kind of a plug and play. Let him, grow in the minors for a few years, and then sit him in right field and hand them a juicy contract, and just let him play there for 15 years. So there'll be lots of Minnesotans with Jenkins jerseys for years to come.
There you go.
Yep. So, all All right, so my last guy in my top 10 is another off the board guy, probably versus the consensus. Although the consensus is high on him, I'm just higher, and that's Noel V. Marte. So Noel V. Marte, Baseball Reference is kind enough to post what is it, Baseball America, Baseball Prospectus, and MLB Pipeline's preseason rankings of Marte. And he fits in the top 25 and on all three of those lists. So he's certainly not, underrated or being grossly overrated here, or being underrated there, or whatever, whatever the time will tell which one was which. But yeah, another this is a pretty specific subset of stats, but I'm going to give you this anyway, just because it's fun. Just as it's fun. So 350 on base, 450 slug, 120 OPS plus as a third baseman with less than 150 plate appearances, which is what Noel V. Marte did. Okay, so guy who just came up, cup of coffee guy, right? Same as we talked about. Same as we talked about with Evan Carter. We're still rookie eligible, so on and so forth. Since 1974, so in the last 50 years, Noel V. Marte is 7th in WAR in that category. So he came up, he produced almost a win in less than 150 plate appearances. So you're talking about a guy that, if they go out and he gets to 650 plate appearances this year, you're talking about a 4 to 5 win player. You're talking about with 30 tanks, with, probably 280 average, maybe even more for the fantasy aspect of things, maybe even 35, 40 tanks in the Great American Ballpark. So, go ahead.
Maybe with the home park. See, that's actually the one thing I think he's a very complete player. I obviously like that he's in the majors already. My one issue when I look at just the numbers, and depending on how many of these episodes we go through, you'll see that I have an affinity for power over many of the other tools.
Thousands of episodes, I'm sure.
Well, let's anyway. Never hit over 200 ISO outside of rookie ball. So, the scouting reports have it there. I'm not a scout. I've never seen him play in person. I didn't see it on the page. That was my only, I'm not going to call it a red flag, beige flag. I don't know who's popularizing that.
Yes.
But that's my only concern. Now, again, you make a good point. You got to look at the context of the situation. Great American Ballpark is likely going to help that. So, and very complete hitter. Yeah.
All right. So real quick, let's each just, rather than trading back and forth, let's each go over our next three. So 11, 12, and 13, not in any specific order necessarily, but our next three, and just throw out the names, and then we'll banter about my three names and then your three names, or vice versa. And then that'll wrap up this episode. So you want to go first? You want me to?
I'll jump in.
All right, go ahead.
All right. So 3 names for me. We talked a lot about first year players. Neither of us mentioned Dylan Cruz. So we talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
For me, he's 12. Right above him, I've got Cade Horton. Hype train galore. For me, I see a lot of the elements that I talked about in some of the other pitchers that I had here. Really nice upside there. And then number 13, I should say, right after Cruz for me, is Coby Mayo. I'm a big fan. Not sure about the defense in reality, but that's less important for me as long as he's going to play. I think he's going to play.
Okay.
I see a big time kind of classic power hitter, high on base, 40 home run upside. So I seem to be, again, a little bit higher than a lot of the industry on him at this point, but the proximity and the points upside, I think is huge with Coby Mayo.
Totally 100% agree. I actually, interestingly enough, we have Cruz and Mayo are commonalities for us.
All right.
So we almost have as much consensus off the board as we do on the board. But yeah, the Cruz actually strikes me as the, for those of you who are going out there in your first year player drafts and you're going to be picking, 4th, 5th, 6th, whatever, Cruz is exactly the name. You're hoping that everybody gets high on Walker Jenkins. You're hoping that everybody gets high on Max Clark. You're hoping that everybody gets high, whatever. Cruz is the kind of guy where he slips to beyond where maybe he quote unquote should, and he just goes and annihilates the minor leagues this year and debuts with Washington later this summer. Just he was just an absolute terror at LSU. So definitely
Talk about consensus number one for years until the draft. But
right, yep, no doubt about it. And then Mayo, I mean Mayo is if we talked about Roman Anthony looking the part of a baseball player, Mayo looks the part of a slugger. Right. He reminds me a lot of almost like a Jim Thome, Frank Thomas type, just gonna tear the piss off the ball and go out and hit a bunch of tanks and do it with a good bat because he's got a good eye, he's got a good on base. I mean,
I can get treated at the plate.
Yep. So anyway, my other guy, I don't have Cade Horton nearly that high. But my other guy is actually Carson Williams, and that's again probably where my real world baseball comes in. And interestingly, I used the Dansby Swanson comp against Lawler. I'm going to use it for Carson. I think Carson's going to be a superlative defender at short for years to come, and he's going to hit you 280, and he's going to hit again like we talked about the 18-20 tanks and the 18 to 20 bags, and he's going to do it with 35 or 40 doubles and a bunch of walks and a bunch of runs scored. And I just don't see where you can go wrong with taking this guy in your first year player, or not your first year player drafts, but you're taking this guy in your minor leagues and kind of a plug and play guy. Just leave him in there, set it and forget it kind of thing. So
and he's somebody that like you may be concerned Tampa is shuffling these guys all around, but he's got the defense at shortstop that he's just going to be a lock in that lineup.
No doubt about it.
As long as he's hitting, that's the only a little bit of a wild card, but there's some good metrics from what you read behind.
Yep,
a little bit higher strikeouts than you'd like.
Yep. So okay, well that wraps up episode 2 of Two Guys One Roto. We would be remiss if you didn't mention you can follow us on Twitter at 2 Guys 1 Roto, all one word, so to speak. Number 2 guys, number 1 Roto. You can follow me individually if you'd like to. I'm pretty active on Twitter myself. I am at DW the Original. Again, at DW the Original. Rich, if you care to share your Twitter handle, you're welcome to, or you're less active.
I'm a little bit less active on Twitter, but if you want to hit me up, I'm at RSAYRE04.
Okay, great. And we appreciate everybody taking the time to join us, and hope you all have a great night or day, wherever you are.
See you next time.